I think we already had finished this research questions. Okay. So research problem is a general expression, and in the problem there are questions. So for example, your problem is this. The study aims to explore the experiences. So in other words, class, yung problem could also be referred to objectives, okay, or the intent of the study. Okay. So yung research question, those are the specific, okay, objectives. So dito sa research problem, the general objective. Okay. So maybe in your concept paper, you have already included this, no? Research problem and rationale, ano yung gusto nating mangyari sa research natin, and the things that we would like to answer. So as you see here, meron tayong nakikita na kung sa general research problem, so gusto lang natin explore ng experiences, challenges, then coping mechanisms. So in the research question, specify lang talaga siya, no? How is the experience in online teaching? What are the challenges? Okay, and then how do teachers cope? Okay. So anyway, related talaga dapat. Remember this. So research problem should be the basis of our research questions or our specific objectives. Next, so qualitative research statement or the intent of the study. So since qualitative research requires a personal immersion, qualitative research statement should help you extract what you have observed. So observations based on the interview process, or based on the immersion process, if you really had immersed yourself in a particular community like ethnography. So personal immersion, kasali na dyan yung pag-conduct ng interview, yung pag-interpret natin ng data. And qualitative research statements focuses on understanding stories. Because again, when we talk about quali, so we will be focused on the stories. Okay, kung ano yung nangyari talaga, no? And that's why as we try to ask questions, we really have to delve deeper into the phenomenon. That's why we really need to ask questions that would really suffice or could help us like get what we want in relation with our objective. How can we write a qualitative research questions? So we have to start with what, why, how. And then question should be open-ended. Okay. And then the stated question should be reflective. Okay. It would reflect the nature of the phenomenon. Okay. And then the central question should be identified. So what is the central question? So yung central question, this will refer to yung research problem. Okay? Okay, so isa lang yun central question. And coming from that central question, alam mo tayong mga other specific questions. Okay? So ganyan siya. Okay, and then dito na papasok, no, kasi meron na tayong central question, dito na papasok yung sub-questions that narrow down the central question. Okay? Yan, galing pa rin yan sa objectives class, ha? Again, yung questions at objectives, dapat related talaga sila sa isa't isa. Hindi pwede magkaiba. So, please take note of that. Most of the time, dyan talaga nag-ask yung mga panelists, no? Bakit ganito yung question, tapos ganito yung intent or yung objective, hindi naman sila magkatugma. Okay, dapat ipagtugma talaga natin. So, a qualitative research question should always be open-ended in nature so that discoveries about the phenomenon can be made. So, dili gid siya pwede anong yes or no lang ng mga question. So, characteristics of a good research statement: researchable and relevant. Okay. So, when we say researchable, so pwede natin siyang i-research Like considering those smart, good na class, yung smart. I think I already explained it last time, no? And relevant also, so yung parang in touch with reality talaga, no? Like timely masyado. Okay? So that's a characteristic of a good research statement. Okay. Sige. Next, dito na tayo setting, no? Ito yung gusto kong ma-highlight this afternoon's discussion. Okay, the scope and limitation of a qualitative research. So, this scope, limitations, and delimitations define the coverage of the study and avoid or minimize difficulties during the conduct of research. So kung hindi natin alam kung ano yung scope or saklaw ng pag-aaralan natin, hindi natin alam kung ano yung limitations and then delimitations ng study natin, mahihirapan tayo. Okay? Kasi na talk about scope, we are trying to narrow down our topic, no? Kapag hindi talaga natin na-narrow down yung topic natin, so napaka-broad niya, so mahihirapan talaga tayo. And then hindi natin alam kung ano yung mga limitations na pwede nating ma-encounter. Like for example, time constraint, the lack of participants of this particular kind of study, and the limitations also, katong mga specifications na in terms of the scope. Okay? Sige lang, we'll elaborate that later and we'll give concrete examples. Okay. So, these also set boundaries and restrictions that can affect the flow of conducting the research study. So, by knowing these things, so mas magaganda, mas easier na yung flow ng pag-conduct natin ng study. Okay. Sige, dito na tayo sa definition class. Okay. And the functions of these terms, no? Isa-isahin na natin. So, na-talk about scope. Okay. So, this describes the coverage of the study. Okay. It indicates general boundaries of the study. Okay. This serves as the basis when setting up the delimitations of the study. Okay, ang scope and delimitations class almost the same yan sila. But when you talk about scope, it's mas dili kaya siya specified, mas general siya. But when you talk about delimitations, no, that is more specified. Okay, like for example, the scope is all about senior high school, okay, students. So when we talk about delimitation, mas specified na siya unsa nga section or unsa nga strand. Okay? So ganyan yung parang essay or like yung ganyan pagkakaintindi sa kanila, like the difference or their difference. Okay, sige. So we have to consider these things, no? When we talk about scope. So this will refer us to topics or ideas covered in the study. Okay, so ano ba yung topic talaga natin? For example, we have itong mga topic na katong westernization of culture and then among the senior high school students. Okay, that's the topic. Okay, and the geographical details, pwede rin natin ilagay in Davao City. Okay. And then the theories and methods involved. So pwede nating sabihin a qualitative study. Okay. So our topic is westernization of the Filipino culture, then in Davao City, and then a qualitative study. So in that sense, meron na tayong scope. Okay, kasi na-consider natin yung mga bagay na to. Okay? Sige. So let us proceed now to the limitations. Okay. This refers to the uncontrollable factors that can affect. Again, uncontrollable. Hindi natin siya makontrol. Like, ito talaga, as we go through with the study, ito yung mangyayari, ito yung nangyari. Okay? And specifically on the part of the methodology and results. Okay, sige, let's elaborate. Okay, so here are some of the examples. Okay, these are examples of the limitation. Ano ba yung limitation? Okay. Here are samples of methodological limitations and personal limitations. Okay. So na talk about methodological limitations, so these will refer to the required number of participants. Okay, because for example, your panelists required you to have at least 10 participants. Okay. But then, as we go through with the research, hindi talaga natin kinaya na umabot ng 10 kasi wala na tayong participants. For example, rape victims. So siguro wala na talaga tayong mahanap na rape victims in a particular city or with a particular range of age. So wala na talaga, but yun yung ni-require. So in that sense, pwede natin yung include sa research natin dun sa final paper na with regards the number of participants, we only have 5 due to the limited number of participants na hindi na talaga kinaya na umabot pa ng 10, 6 or then we will just put some justifications that even though hindi siya umabot ng 10, the data is already saturated. Their answers, the answers of these 5 persons or participants are already somehow the same with each other, no? And that's why we can claim na the data is already saturated. Okay? So, or simply say, data saturation was reached. Okay? Ganun lang. And then the sufficiency of references to support claims. Okay, in qualitative study, hindi talaga natin i-expect na marami masyado tayong references or mga RL. Okay? Kasi in qualitative study, it is assumed that there is really a limited number of references or studies that were conducted prior to our study. Why? Because kaya nga, you are trying to understand this phenomenon or reality because we as researchers believe that wala pang masyadong nag-aaral nito. Hindi pa naiintindihan yung phenomenon na to. Okay? And that can be included in the methodological limitations. Okay? So, in quali, dili na siya padaghanay og RL, dili siya padaghanay. Unlike with quanti, na you really have to support almost everything prior to the proposal. Dapat meron ka na maraming mga supporting references, no, to support your theory, to support your hypothesis. But in here, no, kahit konti lang na references that is related, no, kahit hindi siya directly supporting to your claim, so that's good enough, no? Because that is included in the methodological limitations, especially in qualitative research. And data collection, so pag-collect natin ng data, meron ding mga limitations like mga namatay. For example, namoy 5 or 6, then namatay jud ang isa. So sila lang yun ang for example, astronaut. Gusto nyong malaman yung lived experiences ng mga astronauts on their journey towards the moon. And then you are supposed to interview these persons. Okay? But then namatay yung isa or dalawa. Okay? So that can be included in the methodological limitations. No? Because hindi na talaga siya na-collect because of an incident that had happened. Okay? And measurement, no? When we talk about measurement, so basically nagre-refer na to siya sa quantitative, no? So meron kasi mga data, for example, na kulang ang sample population and in terms of measurement, hindi siya gaano ma-measure, okay, that should be included in the final paper. That there had been a problem that was encountered due to this measurement na issue. Okay? And then technique limitations. Okay, when I talk about techniques, so it will refer to the design, research designs. Okay? So when I talk about technique, like for example sa case study or sa narrative na lang. In narrative, again, most of the time we are only talking with or dealing with one or two participants. No? And that's why in that particular technique, hindi talaga natin like ma-generalize man lang. No? Kasi isa lang naman na experience to. So basically, this technique also has its limitation kasi hindi talaga siya generalizable. Okay? So, ganun. Yun yung mga methodological limitations. And yung personal limitations naman, basic masyado, no? Language barriers. Okay? So, for example, yung kausap nyo is nahihirapan siya magsalita ng English. No? For example, when you have a study of the lived experiences of Indian students in Davao, so yan, mahirap talaga. So you have to include, no, that there is a language barrier. No, at least malalaman din ng mga readers na nahirapan pala sila because ganito yung experience. Okay? Time constraints, so yan. Like for example, yung kulang juga yung time sa research, no, sa grade 11. So yes, you can also still include that. And biases, okay, and then financial or budgetary limitations. So there are times na di na talaga aabot or kakayanin ng budget natin. So yes, that can be included, no? For example, hindi masyadong rich yung data, hindi siya masyadong comprehensive. That is because of financial constraints or limitations. So the researcher should include that. Okay, so now let's proceed with delimitation. What is delimitation? Okay, so delimitation are boundaries that the researcher sets up based on the identified scope and limitation. Okay, specific na good kayo na siya na kina-set up natin. At least sure tayo na hanggang dito lang talaga, ganito lang talaga. Sige. So here, so this section commonly identifies the following. Okay, so as I've mentioned kanina, specific population. So like for example, when we try to specify na talaga na grade 11, section this and that. Okay? Specific time limit for conducting, no? Sabihin natin na the research was conducted for 3 months, okay, from March to May, so mga ganun. And the topics and ideas that will be included and excluded. So we talk about, for example, westernization. So westernization is a very broad thing. And how can we narrow that down? For example, we will only just focus on so may mga westernization, for example, clothing or fashion. Okay? So you have to include in that particular na etong clothing lang unincluded, the rest are not. Or with all the westernization culture, yung clothing lang yung hindi namin in-include. Okay? Kasi kami yung nag-determine kung ano yung i-include or i-exclude namin. Okay? So ganyan siya. And then next is specific geographical locations of the observation. So, like for example, in Davao City or particularly adto gitag barrio setting and specific theories and methods to be used. Okay, so dyan, pwede na rin natin dito include kung ano yung research methodologies or mga techniques or design na gagamitin natin. Ano ba yan? Phenomenologies, ganyan. So that is delimitation. No? In this sense, mas magiging specified na talaga yung research topic natin. okay, or research problem. Okay, so I'll be presenting now some concrete examples as to how we can identify or differentiate scope from delimitation. Okay, hindi na natin isasali yung limitation because limitation is somehow a different thing talaga. Okay? Sige, for example, with this topic, the experiences of rice farmers in Davao del Sur. So the scope is rice farmers in Davao del Sur. So sila yung topic talaga. But then, when we talk about delimitation, sasabihin na natin na in selected areas in Bansalan. So when we talk about geographical setting, so hindi na siya parang province-wide, but particular places na lang in one particular town in Davao del Sur. So that is how we delimit our study. Okay? Okay, so ito, na talk about poverty in the Philippines na topic. Okay, so yung scope natin or yung topic in general is poverty in urban places. Okay, delimitation, poverty in selected cities in Metro Manila. Okay, so I hope you now appreciate the differences between the scope and the limitation. So as you see here, you have a graph ba niyo, or image that represents that in the scope, in there, nandyan na yung limitation inside that. And to specify more, nandyan na talaga yung delimitation at the center of it. Okay? So, ganyan yung scope, limitation, and delimitation. Here, identifying the significance of qualitative research, I think hindi na talaga siya ganun ka-necessary na elaborate pa because we have discussed too much about the significance of qualitative research, like last time we already had discussed about this, so dili na ko magkuhan ani class, dili na ko mag-highlight ani. I would just ask you to read your study guide, these are understandable things naman, So yung point lang naman talaga nito is in a qualitative research na agyo dapat tay positive impact or effect to the society in general or to specific group of people. Okay? So dapat alam natin kung sino yung makikinabang sa gagawin natin. Okay? So dito meron lang mga example na binigay class kung sino ba yung magkaka-benefit sa qualitative research. Okay, first dito is the researcher himself. Why? Because in a qualitative research, so as you try to immerse yourself with those persons who experience the same phenomenon, mas maintindihan natin yung situation nila. Like for example, as I've mentioned, rape victims. So siguro we have presumptions and assumptions kung ano yung experiences nila, but as we also try to ask them personally, it will be different already. Okay? And next is the individual or groups whose knowledge and awareness about the topic will be increased. Okay? So yan, sila yung then the organizations. So as we try to write the significance of the study, you may include this. Okay? So the organization that will make use of the information in the research study, like the school, like kung mag-study mo about the experiences of the senior high school, so the school or the institution or the community that may craft policies and enhance their knowledge based on the findings of the study. Okay? So hopefully, as you also try to select your research, we have really to put in mind kung gaano siya ka-impactful to others, okay, or to the society itself. Okay? Any questions so far?